Okay, hi everyone. My name's Maura Rivera. I'm the CMO here at Qualified, and today I am joined by Nani Schaefer, CMO at Channel 99. Nani, welcome.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about how to really build a predictable pipeline waterfall model so that you can kind of plan for quarters and years ahead about what pipeline coverage you need. But before we dive in, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Tell me about what you and the team at Channel 99 are doing.
Yeah, of course. So I'm CMO at Channel 99. And the way I like to think about Channel 99 and kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning is it's sort of the modern approach to attribution. So the questions that we had or the concerns that I think we've all sort of shared around a more traditional approach to attribution, we're aiming to sort of get past those stumbling blocks that we've seen. And so thinking about, for example, your digital channels in particular, being able to make sure that we're both accurately and precisely allocating or understanding where the dollars that you're spending on those are winding up in terms of engagement and revenue ultimately. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be thinking about that, and plays really well into sort of the discussion we're having today around how to build pipeline and how to be predictable in your business.
Mm-hmm. And what a relevant product right now. I feel like a big theme of our gathering today is how do you prove the ROI of your marketing investment? How do you focus on the right things from a marketing perspective? So Channel 99 is really coming in to help solve that problem. So super excited to see what you guys are doing. So Nani, as a CMO, what are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to setting pipeline targets and predicting pipeline? I think we've all been in the room before, myself included, where we write a huge number on the wall and say, this is what we're going to go after this quarter. What are some of the challenges as a CMO when you're kind of building out this framework?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is a little bit on the boring side, which is just having the right data. So understanding precisely how much pipeline you have generated in the past is really critical for understanding how much you're going to be able to generate in the future. And that seems like a really simple thing on the surface, but you'd be surprised at how often different departments within a given organization will have different answers to that question. And so being really clear around pure definitions. What is pipeline? How do we define pipeline? How do we break up our pipeline into different segments? What does it mean to be, an enterprise pipeline opportunity versus a mid-market one versus SMB, new business upsell? So all of these sort of, again, kind of boring, but really foundational definitions are important. And the other challenge I would say comes up just around like alignment and communication across teams. So again, I think of especially sales, marketing, and finance as needing to be completely on the same page about the goals that we're setting, how we arrived at them, and how we want to sort of approach meeting them. And if those three parts of the org are sort of off in their separate silos, you end up with a problem from the start. So those two things I think are important, just the data and the kind of communication. And both of those could be bigger challenges than you might expect.
Mm-hmm. And I think you oftentimes make assumptions. Everybody's thinking about pipeline the same way I'm thinking about it. Everybody's defining it the same way we are. But it's so important to have that conversation and almost have a glossary of terms, right? And also be willing to maybe adjust it as your business changes.
Exactly. And the other thing I would add too is you don't want any surprises, right? So you never want to walk into let alone like a board meeting, but even, getting up in front of your CEO and surprising your head of sales with here's where we are with pipeline and having them not agree with that, right? So making sure you're really, really in tune and on the same page when it comes to the measurement of your own performance.
So let's get into the meat of it. I saw you gave this session, a similar kind of talk track at the Norwest CMO Summit a few months ago.
Yeah.
And I immediately left and was like, we've got to bring this to the masses. Your session was one where every CMO around me was taking out their notepads. They were taking out their pens. They were scratching things down. I think a lot of folks haven't kind of mastered this art of how you create a pipeline waterfall model. So can you tell me kind of what is a pipeline waterfall model and how does your team use this data?
Yeah. So just kind of at the beginning here, when we think about what an actual pipeline waterfall is, it's a combination of being able to understand the pipeline that you're generating and what you're expecting to have come out of that when it comes to revenue. So in a given quarter, let's say you're going to generate a certain amount of pipeline, a certain number of pipeline opportunities, and you want to be able to be really predictable about where that's going to land in terms of the closed won revenue that's going to come out of it. And it depends on your business, and it depends on even subsegments of your business for how that's going to happen. So you might, and we'll get into some of the more detail on this, but you might expect, some small percentage of that pipeline to close within a single quarter, that same quarter, right? But much of it you're really relying on for future quarters. And so that's why it becomes especially critical for businesses, because the pipeline that we're generating for today, sure, some of it's going to close in the short term, but it's really our building blocks for the future. And so the more predictable we can be about that, the better off we are, so that we can understand whether to, panic or not at where we are.
And I think sometimes as marketing leaders, we think just about the pipeline we need to generate, but we're not always spending enough time dissecting the coverage that we have and how it will kind of carry us into future quarters. Our CRO before has talked about there's pipe gen and there's pipe when it's going to hit and materialize.
Exactly.
And I think that's an important lens for everybody to kind of carry through to their planning. It's pertinent.
Exactly.
You talked at the beginning about some of the things you kind of need to do early and often, which is let's make sure we're all speaking the same language. We have the same things defined.
Yeah.
But before you go into building the model, you kind of have your 6-step framework. There's some data you need to make sure you have your hands on at the beginning. So before you even start building this model, what information should you pull in?
Yeah, good question. There are a couple of important things that you're going to need. One is as much historical data as you can get your hands on, which kind of goes without saying, and it depends on where you are and how old your business is. Typically, if you've got about 4 quarters of data, you're in a pretty good place, right? Most pipeline is going to resolve itself within a year. For true enterprise business, that can be different. It can be, we know that deals can take years, but for the most part, when you're talking about businesses, you can get enough of a sort of cycle and understanding where pipeline is going to go if you've got a solid, 4+ quarters. So historical data is really important. And making sure that this is where, it's unsexy, but really important, is that your Salesforce data is clean, right? Or your CRM data is clean. And so looking at the deals that you're closing and how much, they're bringing in terms of bookings. Understanding your close rates, and we'll talk about kind of how we define close rates, because that's another really important term that we talk about a lot, and lots of people have lots of different definitions for it. So we'll talk about what that means in a little bit, but having a sort of standardized way of looking at that over time, and then building out and looking at your new targets, what's coming up in the future. And typically that's going to start with your finance team, right? Some all-in number that says we need to bring in this number of dollars in this quarter, in the following quarter, in the following quarter. Now, how do we figure out how to get there? And that's really the ultimate goal of our discussion today is, okay, given we know we need to hit this number of dollars, how much pipeline do we need to generate today based on what we already have and what we expect to build in the future?
Okay. And when are you usually thinking about building this? So here we are, it's April, we're all kind of in the throes of our fiscal year. We're in Q1, some are just starting Q2. Is this an exercise you usually do in the fall as you plan for the next fiscal? Is this something you're constantly pressure testing? How do you think about kind of the cadence and timing of this exercise?
Really any and all of the above. So I would say typically the formal, pipeline goal setting for the year starts in the sort of September timeframe, depending on your fiscal, right? In the fall, a quarter before you start your new fiscal. That's typically when finance is starting to get a better idea of what we want in terms of our revenue and bookings goals for the following year. That being said, it's incredibly important that these waterfalls and the outcome of them, the sort of output in terms of pipeline goals, that's something you're going to look at every day, every week, right? And you're also going to be, as you say, pressure testing these as each quarter closes. Typically is another good time frame where you want to review and say, okay, these are the assumptions we put into the model. Are we seeing those same assumptions hold true in real life? And if not, how do we adjust? Mm-hmm. So it's really a kind of all the time exercise. But like I say, sort of an annual planning thing, and then a quarterly checkup, and then weekly, daily. Where you're basically looking at your own performance against the goals.
Yeah, it's living, breathing, just like all things are.
Exactly.
And so what are, as you kind of, so you get this set up, it's Q1, you're keeping an eye on the data. What are some of those things you should look out for that to kind of traps or gotchas that might show you that you might need to adjust some things?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're way off, right? And if you're as we get into sort of building out the model itself, one of the first thing it sounds again so silly, but that's important to do, is this sort of sniff test. So if in a given quarter, let's say it's Q3, and you as a team had needed to generate 250 opportunities. And suddenly your model is spitting out something that says you need to generate 4,800, right? There's no way you're going to do that absent a miracle, right? So making sure that the model that you're building is giving you a reasonable set of expectations, kind of an important thing to be thinking about. But other things that can factor in happen all the time in businesses, right? You launch a new product, you reorganize your sales team, you focus on a different area in the market, right? All of those can have an impact on what you're expecting in terms of the input of the model. And I keep saying like the inputs to the model, there's really at least three things that are going to impact the number of pipeline opportunities you need to generate. One is the close rate we talked about, one is the deal velocity, and one is the deal size, right? Those are the only things that really factor into how much pipeline you're going to need to generate. So anything that might impact any of those three might warrant readjusting your model.
Okay, great. Well, let's dive into it. You kind of have the 6-step framework. So why don't you show it to us?
Yeah. So, and apologies in advance because we're going to get into some actual numbers and really make this as practical as we can. But I thought it would be useful to kind of look at real life examples. So the first step is just looking at what has been closed won by each pipeline cohort. So if you're looking at the chart here, across the left side, you're going to see each quarter. And the number of pipeline opportunities that have been generated within that given quarter. Across the top, you see those same quarters, but now we're looking at closed won deals, right? So if, for example, you see 125 pipeline opportunities generated in Q1, we see that 16 of those, of that cohort, closed in that same quarter, and then we see 9 closed the following quarter, 6, 3, 1, right? So it's taken about 5 quarters to, let's call it, resolve those pipeline opportunities. So you can kind of get a sense of, over time, the velocity of these different pipeline opportunity and the pipeline cohort that you're looking at. So that's the sort of level set. This is all historical data that we talked about beforehand, right? So you can access this hopefully anytime. And this is just sort of the basis for the inputs of the model. So from there, you're going to enter in your goals going forward, right? So in terms of the total bookings that you need to generate, and then dividing by the average deal size that you've got, how many actual opportunities need to be closed won, right? So you can see along the bottom here, for example, in this upcoming Q1, right, maybe I need to close 36 opportunities. That's the idea, is I need to hit 36 opportunities, and how am I going to get there? So now we move on to the sort of third step, which is, well, what is this like velocity that we're talking about here? What can I expect for any of these different cohorts? So instead of looking at hard numbers, we swap it over to percentages. So back to that Q1 example, right? Of the 125, 13% closed in one quarter, 7% closed in 2 quarters, 5%, 2%, 1%. You can see this sort of declining as we like finish up that particular cohort. And that helps us because as you look down sort of diagonally in that waterfall, you start to get a sense of this average, we'll call it average 1 quarter close rate, average 2 quarter close rate. So on average, right, well, I don't know what the average is, but you can see, 13%, 9%, 8%, 9%, right? Somewhere in that range is what we might expect to see in any cohort's first quarter out the gate. And that enables us then to build out what we might expect in the future if we literally generated no more pipeline, right? So out of only the pipeline that we've generated in the past to date, what's still left to ring out, right? Because we generated pipeline yesterday, right? Hopefully we had a good day. And so what is that? What might we expect in the future if we did nothing else, right? So you can see again, for example, if we closed out Q4, we had 184 pipeline opportunities that we generated. 16 of them closed in that first quarter. Hey, this upcoming quarter, we're expecting 10-ish more deals to come just from that cohort, right? And from 2 quarters ago, we're going to get another 6 deals. So you can kind of see, even with doing nothing for my upcoming quarter, I'm going to get 18, 19 opportunities that will be closed won. So now we just have to fill the delta, right? So we talk 18, 19, we need to get to 36. How do we do that? We add 17.4 in this case, which we know is impossible, but we're talking about averages here. So I need to generate 17 more opportunities in order to fill that delta from the pipeline I'm going to generate this very quarter, because that's all I have left. I've already incorporated in all the expectation for previous pipeline. So given that, how much pipeline do I need to generate this quarter? So we go back to that sort of input, the expectation that around, let's call it 8% of my pipeline generated in a given quarter is going to close that same quarter. And I wind up with figuring out I need, in this case, 217 opportunities in order to close 17 of them this particular quarter and close that gap. So that's sort of like the ultimate answer to the question that we had, how much pipeline do we need to generate? And you just fill in the rest of the model from there. And that, in a nutshell, in a quick few minutes, is kind of how you generate that waterfall model.
When you look at sources, right, we all are not immune to the sales versus marketing debate or tension. How do you think, do you ever factor that into this model? Is that too in the weeds, and does that get too messy? Like, how do you kind of think about dividing and conquering who's doing what?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I am of a mind that dividing up a sort of funnel or a pipeline number between sales and marketing is a useless waste of time. My general practice is that marketing should take on the full number, knowing that, of course, we're not generating, from the beginning all of these, but to be honest, we're probably at least touching nearly all of them, right? It's a rare opportunity that's going to close with no one coming to your website ever, like poor research on their end. So what I prefer to do is say marketing and sales, right? And particularly sort of like the SDR function often, right? We're going to take on the same pipeline number together so that we're all looking at the same numbers and approaching the same goal, and neither one of us can ever reach the goal without the other one reaching the goal. Then on top of that, we might layer in additional information about, okay, it was helpful for us to understand that some portion of this was influenced by a webinar or was influenced by an event that we went to or a dinner that we hosted or whatever it might be. But I don't like to sort of say, I'm going to peel this apart and pretend that there is a world in which marketing was the only reason that a pipeline opportunity was generated or sales was the only reason a pipeline opportunity was generated. It's just too complicated in the B2B world to do that. So when you are breaking down, that isn't to say you're not going to have multiple waterfalls, but it's going to be mid-market enterprise or new business upsell. It's not going to be, I wouldn't recommend marketing sales.
I mean, in today's world, you have to work together. You have to 100%. Go towards one target, or else it's finger pointy chaos all the way. It's pure chaos.
Yeah.
And hopefully all those channels are working in concert. They're seeing an advertisement. They're coming to an event. We outbound to them. We warm them up. Like that, everybody's working together.
Exactly.
So this waterfall model that you just built, how do you kind of put it into practice? How do you break it beyond, it's great that we have this spreadsheet and we have a source of truth and we have all the numbers, but how do you find yourself leveraging it throughout your organization?
Yeah. It's a great question. Honestly, one of my very favorite ways of leveraging it is in a weekly meeting that actually was started at my own company, Demand Base. Lots of companies do this, but we called it our funnel working group, where the sales, marketing, and operations leadership teams would come together every week and review these numbers. And you would think, okay, we could just update the dashboard, like we can all refresh that together. But it was such a healthy conversation to get that group of people in the room to start with pipeline as our basis, to say, how are we performing in a granular way this week against our goal? And if we're ahead of target, what do we attribute that to? And if we're behind our target, what do we attribute that to, and how do we fix that? And it enabled us to, again, importantly, stay in alignment, but also to sort of approach things as a team together and never let anything suddenly get way out of hand. You don't want to end up at the end of the quarter and be like,
what happened?
We completely whiffed, right? Yeah. It has to be something more frequent than that. So that's just one example, lots of different ways, but I think some way of keeping it sort of alive and in focus all the time.
The funnel working group. I haven't heard that. We call it our pipeline council, but
that's a great name too.
Yeah. Week over week. How are we trending? What are our gap plans? How are we going to hit it? What's coming into market from sales and marketing? And it's a really good alignment exercise, and
so important.
And even if people are just a fly on the wall to kind of wrap their heads around the data, it's critical. So thank you, Nani. This was so fun. And I'm super excited because we're making this model that you built available to everybody. So we have a guide where everybody can really get the waterfall wisdom that Nani just dropped on us. And we also are going to have kind of a blank template that you can use to plug in your own numbers and adjust it and use it to apply to your own business. I think every CMO could benefit from this, and also RevOps leaders, demand gen leaders. So thank you for imparting your waterfall wisdom.
Anytime.
On us
Thank you so much for having me.
Super fun.